Have I made a massive mistake here? First of all, this is not going to be a moan about my job because I've got the best job in the world. I know a lot of people watch channels like this and think, I'd love to be doing that, and I completely get it. Trust me, there's a lot of hard work to get here, but boy is it fun and exciting, and we get to play with the latest tech. However, there is a downside to this, and it's partly why you see all of these kind of, I've switched videos, and 2 months later, I was wrong, all that stuff that really gets on people's nerves, I know. Now, there's two sides to that. One is that, yes, we know what we're doing when we do a iPhone user switches to the S25 Ultra. The other side of it is that there is a huge shred of truth to that as well, because we do get all these different phones in and we have to make a commitment to one of them. So for me, recently, I've committed to the iPhone 16e. I've switched from the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which people still don't believe, but I have done it, to this phone, and I don't regret that switch at all. Or I didn't regret it until I got my hands on this. This is the same phone, by the way, it's just two different colors. This is the Google Pixel 9. Nearly got the name wrong then. The Google Pixel 9a. That's the other thing. There's so many different phones and names and things. Anyway, it's basically Google's latest mid-range phone. Now, I've only had this for 24 hours, but I've been doing this for long enough now, and I've used and tested enough phones to make pretty accurate judgments quite quickly. And this is just utterly brilliant. However, you do need to watch the rest of this video if you're thinking about this. And let's be honest, if you just want to see me say, this is better than this, because I know a lot of you do. Okay, at this point, I'd normally reel off all of the specs, but I can't be bothered. I've stopped doing that because we don't need to do that, guys. The specs are down here. The ones that matter are the fact that it has the Tensor G4 chip, so it has the same chip as the flagship Pixel 9 series. It just has 8 gig of RAM versus 16 gig of RAM that you get if you go for the 9 Pro, etc. It costs $499 or $599, depending on which one you go for in terms of the storage. That makes it very much a mid-range phone, and it makes it cheaper than the iPhone 16e if you go for that 128 gig version. Let's get straight into what matters though, the design. This is the best looking mid-range phone on the market, no question, although if you don't agree with me, obviously get involved in the comments. These are the two of the colorways that you can get. So this is Iris, which is basically blue, a very light blue, and this is porcelain. They're very nice colors. You know, they're not the kind of utilitarian black and grays that we get with flagship smartphones. That's what I love about the kind of mid-range market. As for the rest of the design, it's kind of earmarked by this camera bump that isn't really a camera bump. In a world where we have these huge camera systems on smartphones, they're very impressive, but they're absolutely massive, and that means that one, they're quite lopsided in terms of weight distribution, but also they rock on the table. So if you put them on the table, they're uneven basically. The Pixel 9a barely has a camera bump, to the point where these cameras in my studio really struggle to focus on it because it's so tiny. And again, in fairness, the iPhone 16e isn't too bad either, but this is taking it to a new level. And as you'll find out later, it doesn't impact the camera performance at all. But I just love the look and feel of this phone. It's quite chunky. It does feel like quite not a thick phone, but it just feels a bit substantial in the best way possible. But it's still very light as well, and it's got rounded corners. The only downside with it, I think, is the fact that the rear casing on this Iris version does smudge, but you really have to look for it. I think this is lovely. I defy you not to like the look of this phone. I know some people won't like it, in which case get involved in the comments, but for me, immediately, that out-of-the-box feeling, lovely. The display, okay, it has big bezels. Some people have pointed this out, which is fair enough. They are quite big. They're slightly bigger, I think, than the iPhone 16e, but I've always not really been that fussed about this kind of thing. It doesn't bother me, basically, and I think the fact this has a 120 Hz refresh rate and a very bright display. This display is perfectly legible in direct sunlight. That more than makes up for it. And again, without wanting to make this an iPhone 16e versus Pixel 9a video, although it's rapidly turning into that, the quality of this display is so much higher than this. Camera system. We have two cameras on the back of this. We have a 48 megapixel wide with optical image stabilization, and a 13 megapixel ultra wide without optical image stabilization, and a 13 megapixel selfie camera. The eagle-eyed or eared amongst you will have realized that basically you have 0.5 and 1 as the zooms. That's it. Anything above that is digital. So 2x, 5, up to 8, basically. All that stuff is digital slash AI-ified. Now that makes it a little bit limited potentially. However, in my testing of the Pixel 9a so far, the zoom isn't that bad. This photo of Warwick Castle, for instance, I think is pretty good. I think the detail on the window, and bearing in mind this is a crop, this is cropping into the sensor, which, well, basically on a lot of smartphones this doesn't work very well. On the Pixel 9a, I think this looks pretty good. However, going back to the optical focal length of 1x and 0.5, they're really good. There's something about the way that they process it that makes these photos pop immediately. And I'm convinced that a lot of other smartphone manufacturers, particularly in Android land, have basically taken a lot of inspiration from Pixel with this. Unless you're pixel peeping and you're really kind of into the kind of technical aspects of photography, which most people who buy these phones aren't, let's be honest. You just want them to look great straight out of the camera without any faffing. And I think still the Pixel is the best at doing that, and the Pixel 9a sits firmly within that realm. I think these standard photos out of this camera at both the wide angle and the standard wide are utterly lovely. And as I've said recently in a few other reviews, my requirements for a smartphone camera have changed massively over the last 3 years since I became a dad. And the reason for that is because I just take photos of my son, and the very first photo I took with the 9A was of Harrison. And, you know, you probably could pick a few faults with it in terms of the technicalities of it, but I don't care. It's a lovely photo of him, and it was the very first photo that this phone took, and it nailed it. If you've got a 3-year-old son or daughter, you'll know that they do not stay still for very long at all. So any camera system that can capture those moments like that, they get my vote completely. 2 other things this camera system does very well. One of them is portraits. I think these portraits, again, of my son are just lovely. I think the bokeh is great. I did a comparison between, again, the 9A and the 16E, and the iPhone has just made a massive hash of this, I think, personally, and I think the Pixel just looks much more natural. I promise you, the iPhone version here was a portrait photo, but there doesn't seem to be any background blur there at all, whereas on the Pixel, there is, and it's just a much nicer, more natural image. The other area where this has comprehensively beaten the iPhone 16e is in the selfie department. Now, this selfie of me is, okay, it's debatable actually, because firstly, it's a challenging shot. There's the sun behind me, and because of that, my face is in shadow. The iPhone has kept that shadow, whereas the Pixel has revealed my face. So it's done a little bit of trickery to, it's probably HDR type stuff to bring out my features and all that sort of stuff. I prefer that Pixel photo. You may not. Let me know in the comments what you think. Personally, I think in terms of just getting a reliable selfie, the Pixel seems to win there. All of these images are completely open to debate, guys. This is the most subjective part of any smartphone review, as I say, so please do let me know down below what you think. When it comes to video performance, I've not had a huge amount of time to test that, but it shoots up to 60 frames per second on that rear camera, and I think it looks pretty good. I think this 4K footage is very usable. I wouldn't hesitate to use it for production purposes on this channel. As for the front-facing camera, so this is 4K. There's only one frame rate for that, which is I think 30 frames per second. But if you drop it down to 1080p, you can go up to 60 frames per second. Testing out the dynamic range here as I go through these shadows and stuff. But yeah, image is straight out of the camera. Again, the mic straight out of the phone. Let me know what you think in the comments. So once again, in terms of the camera system, the Google Pixel 9a has completely won me over. Now it's over to the sponsor of this video, and yes, the footage you're about to see does feature an iPhone, but I can confirm that the DJI stuff you're about to see works with the Pixel perfectly. So when you're shooting video on your phone, there's one thing that can instantly make it look more professional, and that is stabilization. This is why I've been using the DJI Osmo Mobile 7 and 7P series gimbals. With 3-axis stabilization, they take shaky handheld footage and smooth it out effortlessly, whether you're walking, panning, or grabbing cinematic B-roll. They're lightweight, they unfold in one step, and you're ready to shoot straight away with no fiddling or complex settings. Need more creative angles? Well, the built-in extension rod gives you low-angle shots, dynamic motion, and wider perspectives, all without extra gear. And it even has a built-in fill light to keep those shots looking clean in low light conditions. For solo creators, this thing is a game changer. If you want smooth, professional looking videos straight out of your phone, check out the DJI Osmo Mobile 7 and 7P. The link's in the description. And now, performance, which is a really boring topic these days, in the best possible way, because these phones are so good. And the fact this has the same chip as the more expensive 9 Pro is pretty much all you need to know. Yes, it does have half the RAM, but unless you're absolutely pushing the boundaries with your phone and doing loads of gaming, etc., you're not going to notice that. Most people who buy this In fact, everyone who buys this will not notice that. It's fast enough for most people. The setup process is also worth mentioning because this is the purest Android experience ever. So Android 15 on this phone has no bloatware installed. There's no, you don't set it up and then get 15 pages of apps that you'll never use that you have to start uninstalling. There's no weird interface elements that have been kind of plastered on top of it. It's just a very enjoyable and quick setup experience. And it has all of the AI stuff that you get in the more expensive 9 series Pixels. Way too much of it for me to go through in this video. We'll put a list down here of all the AI features. It's got all of them, including Gemini Live with video, which I got to see at Google's HQ in London earlier this week. And it was really impressive. Okay, it's a controlled demo and I need to try it more wholesomely myself, but you just pick up your phone, you point it at a whole bunch of ingredients on the desk, and it can tell you what to make from that ingredients because it can see it and it can work out what it's looking at. Same thing with cocktail recipes. Point this phone at a bunch of spirits in front of you and it starts telling you what kind of cocktails you can make. It can translate things as well. So Google showed us this ability to basically point the phone at foreign words, foreign phrases, and it can tell you what they mean and all that sort of stuff. I do need to test it myself, but the fact you get that in such a well-priced phone, and the fact that Google is so far ahead of certain other brands when it comes to AI means that you're in very good hands if you're interested in that stuff. And I know a lot of people are. And Gemini Live looks like the kind of AI that you can actually use like a human. You can talk to it as though it's a real person, even though it's not. Anyway, more on that in a future video. But performance, battery, AI, operating system, it's really hard to beat. The Pixel 9a isn't perfect. Obviously, I think there are 3 things that I can pick fault with. The first thing is the speaker system, which just isn't as good as the iPhone's speakers. Nothing is, to be fair. It's not terrible, it's just not quite up there with the iPhone. The second thing is the fact, and this is very subjective, that the power button and the volume rocker are the wrong way around. I always have this with Pixels where it just feels like the power button should be here, like other Android phones. The other thing is those bezels. If you're part of the anti-bezel movement, then it might bother you. I don't know. It doesn't bother me, like I say, but it's fair to raise that as a concern, I think. That said, I would just get one of these in your hands and try it before you judge it based on the bezels. On that note, my conclusion about the Pixel 9a is that it is definitely, once again, setting the standard for the mid-range market. It really is. It's so much better than this. I know you're asking this question. I can see the comments coming in already. Should I switch, or why don't I just switch from this to this? I need a moment. If you want to see the conclusion to this, subscribe to this channel. The button's down there somewhere. I will revisit that question. I promise. I just need a moment, guys. I just need to... This is a big thing. This is so...
Oh, it's your Uncle Spurt here, and today we're having a good hot squint at the Bargainus.
I didn't plan that. That was Uncle Spurt. If you know Tech Spurt, Chris Barraclough, you just popped up in my video. A completely random cameo there. Awesome. Anyway, that ruined my outro, but I don't care. Chris is a lovely man. See you later, guys. Make sure you hit subscribe. Let me know what you think about this, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.